Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a book review on the first three books in the Morland Dynasty series by Cynthia Harrod Eagles. The Founding is book one in the series. Set in 15th century northern England, the Morland family witnesses the turbulent years of the War of the Roses. The Dark Rose is book two in the series, following the Morland family through the turbulent years of the reign of King Henry VIII and his 6 wives, and the conflicts between the Catholics and the Protestants. And The Princeling is book three in the series, following the Morland family through the religious conflicts between the Protestants and Catholics during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. So, before I head into my thoughts and feelings on these first three books, I do want to make it very abundantly clear, I guess. When I first purchased these three books initially, I had no idea they were part of a 35 book series. Yes, you guys, 35 books are in this series. It's pretty insane. And that made me feel all sorts of overwhelmed. And I was like, dear God, I just don't know if I have the time and energy for 35 freaking books. So, unfortunately, I guess I'll have a little prequel here to the review. I did really like these first three books in the series, but unfortunately, as I just said, 35 books just made me feel really overwhelmed, and I just don't think I have it in me to try and read all 35 books. And the thing is, I would have to order them all online. These first three books you can find in stores, I think, but the rest of them you can't find. You pretty much got to order them through like a special website that the author has set up if you want to get them all. Um, so yeah, unfortunately, these three books are going to be it for me in the series, but I still want to review them and talk about the pros and cons of this series, because you might have a different feeling than I do. You may be like, hey, I want to continue, or I want to go through the entire series, So this review is really going to be just a guide to anybody who has an interest in this series and whether or not you should try to attempt the whole series or not. Also what I'm going to do, since this is three books that I'm covering, I'm just going to be very vague and general, I guess, an overview of these first three series. Like I said, I'm really going to kind of be focusing on the pros and the cons more than anything, rather than getting into any particular thing in regards to like plot and characters and whatnot. So to begin this review, I suppose, as I mentioned, this is a series of 35 books. I have the first three here, and what you're essentially getting with these first three books especially is the story of this family, the Morland family, hence the Morland Dynasty series, as this is called. And each book, some of the characters do bleed into other books, but these books are covering multiple decades, you guys, and I do mean multiple decades. So yeah, you're seeing some characters be born at the start of a book, and they may be dead by the middle of the book or the end of the book, or if they're kind of born maybe near the end of the book, like they'll make it through like the next book, maybe halfway or close to the end at least. So yeah, these books are covering multiple decades. They're covering huge spans of time within English history and whatnot. And what I personally found compelling about this series, the start of the series and whatnot, is the fact that you are following this family and you're following them through multiple decades, and their pretty much their interactions with history. To us as the reader, the modern reader, this is all past. This is all history. But to these characters, this is their current. Everything that is going on is vital and integral and important to them. We, the reader, we know in hindsight what's coming. We know how a conflict ends. We know who's going to die, like especially the big historical figures and whatnot. So that's what I found compelling initially about the start of this series. Just being with this one very specific family, and how they are changing with the times, you know, how they're changing with the times, how they're thriving, how they're adapting more than anything, because the family really has to adapt through a lot of the conflicts that are occurring. And yeah, who is thriving, who is struggling. So as I gave you with each little quick synopsis of each of these books, this first book is starting with the War of the Roses, which occurred like kind of the tail end of the 1400s and whatnot. And yeah, the War of the Roses lasted a pretty long time, so this book is definitely covering that entire frame of time. And then yeah, like with book 2, that's covering the entirety of the reign of King Henry VIII, and you do get to see all the 6 wives thrown in there. And yeah, like there's members of the Morland family who are within that court. And then with the third book, now we move up a little bit and we're with the reign of Queen Elizabeth the First. And yeah, there are members of the Morland family connected with that and whatnot. And yeah, a big part of all of these books is definitely kind of the religious struggles of the time period. This was a really tumultuous, turbulent time period when it came to the Catholics and the Protestants, and how the Morland family are kind of struggling and coping and adapting to that whole situation. Especially because from what you gather, the Morlands are like a northern family, and the north of England was a very specific type of mood and vibe up in the north compared to kind of like the mid of England and the south of England and whatnot. So yeah, the Morland family, it's like you got to be very aware of their position up in the north and how the north at that time in history really kind of felt about what was going on politically and economically and whatnot. Now, I do got to start heading into some of the cons with these first 3 books, and this may or may not be an issue for some people. This was kind of an issue for me, some of the cons I'm about to get into. The pacing of these books, I think, are very well done to some extent. They do, in my opinion, they do move very quickly, but at the same time, that is also a negative, how quickly they move. As I keep repeating, each of these books covers multiple decades. You are going through dozens and dozens of characters at any given time. And as a result, Cynthia Harrod Eagles, you know, she has to really stay strongly focused on the story she wants to tell and the very particular characters that she wants to tell their story. So, unfortunately, as you're kind of going through each of these books, some characters will only appear for very short amounts of time, and then all of a sudden they're freaking dead. You guys, I can't repeat enough how many characters die over the course of all 3 of these novels. It's pretty insane. It's pretty ridiculous. If you thought George R.R. Martin was bad, wait till you read these books. There are just so many characters dying at any given time, sometimes within pages of each other. You guys, or like a whole chunk of a family might be wiped out in a whole chapter, like especially if a plague hits or there's some sort of natural disaster, you're going to lose a million characters. So, I mean, that's really the one huge downside of a series like this, because you are focusing on this specific family, and, you know, a family tree obviously branches. You know, you have your top apex point up here, and it starts branching. You know, there's these people, they have their children, then all those children have their children, and then those children. I mean, the family tree of this entire first 3 books is pretty wild, you guys. And fortunately, each of the books does have a family tree, which I found incredibly useful as I was reading. So I definitely recommend, if you do pick up the series, it's best every so often to refresh your memory and look at the family tree. I am not kidding. You have to look at the family tree, or you're going to be confused about who is related to who is connected to who is a bastard child of who. It gets pretty crazy, you guys. So I can't repeat enough. I just kind of want to go back to the massive amount of characters in this series. There are a massive amount of characters. You're going to lose a massive amount of characters, and I think as a result, it is a huge struggle and almost a chore and a pain with these novels, that you can't really allow yourself to get overly attached to any particular characters, because why? They're just going to wind up dead in some horribly tragic way, you know? And I mean, that was another thing that I was kind of growing irritated with, just the nature of how some of these characters were dying. Not too many of the characters actually even reach like old age, like just dying from natural causes. A lot of these characters are dying in rather gruesome, terrible ways, either through plague or natural disaster, or through a war, or just something, a horse, you know, a horse running somebody over. I don't know. So that is definitely a big, huge thing, just the amount of characters. You can't get overly attached to anybody. And also, no one is too terribly fleshed out, like multidimensional. Um, and I think when you get books like this that deal with big family sagas, family dynasties, or whatever, that's kind of a drawback, that the focus of the story is just on the family as a whole, and you don't really, and then you get kind of a few characters in there that you get to spend a little bit more time with, and those characters get a little bit fleshed out. But everybody else, all the supporting cast of characters, it's like, why should you almost even bother or care, you know? So yeah, I mean, that's kind of it for my thoughts and feelings on these first three books. Like I said, I kind of wanted to keep it very vague in a sense, rather than trying to get into all the plot and characters. Well, I guess something I didn't touch on, just the historical research. Cynthia Harrod Eagles, definitely a bonus with these books is definitely her great development and research with history and whatnot. You can definitely see that she did her research. She took her time with the research. There's just a lot of little nuances with what's going on in here. And the thing is, I would not recommend this series for the casual reader of historical fiction, if that makes sense. I would recommend this series if you're someone who really truly loves history, and if you're very familiar with English history especially. I don't think a casual reader can get into this. Because fortunately I am very familiar and comfortable with the dynamics and the complexities of things like the War of the Roses and the Tudor dynasty, especially with Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I and whatnot. I'm very familiar with all that stuff. I'm very comfortable with it. So when events would happen, when real historical figures would pop up, I was able to latch onto those things very quickly, and I didn't need any sort of like background context, because these books don't give you don't really give you a hell of a lot of background context, like who is this person, what's going on here, what's up with the north of England, what's up with the south of England, you know, all the dramas, the big major historical events and stuff. These books are just very kind of straightforward, and they, to me, I felt like they kind of expected the reader to be very aware of this time in English history, if that makes any sort of sense. So yeah, I definitely would not recommend these to the casual reader of historical fiction, unfortunately, because I feel like you will be very confused. You're not going to entirely understand what's going on and why something or someone is really important and integral to something, you know? So yeah, that's definitely a big negative. Casual readers, I don't think, can get into this. I do want to make a quick note before I do end this review. This first book especially, because I know this can bother some people, so I guess I need to make this aware for those of you who might be like, oh god, no. This first book, since it does take place during the War of the Roses, it is very pro, like, I guess House of York, if you will, which would be like King Edward the Fourth, right? Yeah, let me make sure I'm getting all my kings right, like King Edward the Fourth and King Richard III and whatnot. It is very pro House of York, especially with King Richard III, because if you know your history, King Richard III is often heavily villainized, mostly I think thanks to Shakespeare's interpretation of Richard III. So this book is very, very, like, very pro Richard III, you guys, which I was fine with, because I actually really quite like just the story of Richard III, you know, because I really feel like he's a misunderstood dude. So And yeah, it's very anti-Tudor. Ooh, oh Lord, these books are very anti-Tudor, especially in this first book. I mean, it kind of gets a little better in the next books. It's not so much anti-Tudor, but yeah, the Morlands are definitely anti-Tudor people. They are like fanboys, fangirls of Richard III. So if that's something that might bother you, if you kind of don't like the kind of, you know, the characters who are treated in a positive light versus the characters who are treated in a very negative light, you know, you might want to consider something like that. So yeah, I guess I'll finally end this review, you guys. Overall, these first three books, I did really like them. I know there's parts of this review that y'all are thinking, oh Lord, it sounds like she didn't really like these books, but I did really enjoy them. I loved the historical research. It was very meticulous, well done. I did like the plots in general. I did like the characters, even though the characters I think were very one-dimensional. It's like I still liked them. And yeah, the books did move very quickly, which was a good thing because they are pretty gigantic. They're pretty gigantic books, and yeah, they're covering huge chunks of time. But yeah, just if you're someone unsure about this series, just be very aware. It's 35 books. Do you want to invest that time and energy? And yeah, once again, lots of characters. Pretty much all those characters are dying at some point. Is that going to upset you? Turn you off from the whole thing? So yeah, I definitely recommend just looking more into this series and if it's worth your while, you know. But yeah, for me, unfortunately, these first three books are probably it, though I did have a good time with them. And I did end the third book. I was kind of sad. I was like, oh, I feel like I'm leaving this family and there's still so much left to go, which there is, obviously. So you guys, that is it for my thoughts and my feelings on the first three books in the Morland Dynasty series. In the comments below, have you guys read these books? Do you plan on reading them? Just let me know your thoughts down below. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye, guys.